Welcome to Trailblazing, capitalizing on tax receivable agreements, a Parallaxes Capital podcast that is here to guide you through the world of tax receivable agreements. It's time for Trailblazing.
What is the hardest part of your job today, running a business like this?
Well, I can talk about the tax receivable agreement part of my job, which is, it's a small part of what I do, of course, because most of my work is still in the world of advising mergers and acquisitions and IPOs and debt raises and other types of capital raises. But since your listeners are pretty focused on TRAs specifically, I can focus on that part. Look, I would say, and you know this, Andy, tax receivable agreements, they are, even though they're, you could argue that it's a fairly prolific piece of paper out in the market today. There's still a challenge to helping educate investors on whether there is a transaction that could be done. I think in general, there's still, in certain pockets of the financial world, a fairly limited understanding of tax receivable agreements. And so the market is probably not 100% there yet. And so as someone who works on the advisory side, trying to help clients think through solutions related to tax receivable agreements, oftentimes it can be more challenging identifying where are the more actionable transaction opportunities, and being able to focus our efforts on areas where there's a higher likelihood of finding a solution that will work. Because again, if you look across the entire universe of tax receivable agreements, there are many, many tax receivable agreements out there. And then within each tax receivable agreement, you might have a large number of holders. It could be a few dozen holders or more. And so it is somewhat dispersed in that sense. And it can be sometimes more of a challenge to identify, what specific areas of tax receivable agreements are more fruitful and ready for a transaction.
The trickiest part of my job today, especially being as seasoned as I am, or as around as long as I have been, is the speed at which things are required to take place. And these things are complicated. Tax rules are very complicated. Tax structures are complicated. Every proposal has knock-on effects, and they sort of cycle through, and you have different constituencies. And so the days of getting a handwritten markup and having 2 weeks to think through all the issues and turn it back are over, and now you get a Word document emailed to you and you're expected to type your changes in and send it back in 4 hours, and that's really the challenge. It's the way the world is going. There's no way to stop it, but what you have to do to address it is you have to really staff up on your resources. You've got to have some really good resources available on a moment's notice. So when something comes in that requires immediate attention, you're able to, throw enough resources at it to tackle in the time frame you're allotted.
Well, that's one of the great things about being a tax lawyer, right? Is so much is tricky about it. I mean, there's the aspect, for example, with partnership tax, I mainly focus on slowing down and making sure that I'm not missing something, because I know Subchapter K really, really well. But the danger in once you know something really, really well is thinking that you know the whole thing and that you won't misapply it. So slowing down. But I'd say, having moved from an accounting firm to a law firm, the practice is simply broader. For every individual lawyer at a law firm, you're just doing more different things. And so making sure as you move from task to task that you're giving everything the appropriate level of focus. I have always found just the pausing and thinking and making sure that I'm not moving too quickly, for me personally, the most challenging aspect of the job. And again, it's one thing I really like about it. Technically, right now, the most challenging thing, I don't know if that's where the question was going, is absolutely CAMT and Pillar 2. I mean, I hope CAMT dies a quick death, because it's fast. Pillar 2 is going to be coming upon us. And so technically just dealing with that and think about how that's going to impact M&A and just regular planning for companies is definitely the most technically challenging.
The trickiest part of my job today. So it's probably the trickiest part of being a job tax lawyer since the beginning of time. So my friend and mentor, Bill Welke, working at another large law firm, I think Sidley, and she quit doing it after I think 2 years. And the reason she quit doing it, she is a law and history professor. She's extremely brilliant person, but she didn't like the tax law, and this is where I'm getting to answer your question, because she felt like it was like walking through a field of landmines, right? And I think that continues to be the case, now 20, 30 years later, 40 years later, whatever it is, that the practice of tax law in particular, it's hard to know everything, it's hard to remember everything, and even if you do, you might miss one landmine and you're going to walk into another. And then I would say, our practice has become not just there's so many rules, right? But there's also we're international now as well, and it's just impossible to keep it all in your head.
Probably time management and balancing the requirement to deliver on client demands with the like critical component of developing our earlier career professionals. So as you're aware, in the professional services realm, right, our job requires a lot of effort to respond to client demands, particularly when you're talking about the transaction context, right? So when you're doing buying, selling companies, you're trying to help one of your clients close on a particular deal, or even in the IPO context, even though they're longer term, you still have a lot of different milestones you have to push for. And so when you're balancing those timeline constraints, right, and the client demands, you also have to focus a lot of your time and effort, at least at the partner, principal, and manager level, at developing our people, right? Because long term, building a practice, it is only sustainable, right, if your early career professionals are built up. They can then, of course, grow and have their own career progression, and then essentially be the succession plan for when the existing partners and principals retire and then ride off into the sunset. And so it really is balancing that, the delivery to our clients, and then our training and our building of our early career professionals, which is, to me, the most challenging part of the job.
So I think today everything operates at a super accelerated pace. And I think this in isolation is not hard. I think in part because I'm fortunate enough to have done a lot of deals over the years, and I'm fortunate enough to be supported by a fantastic group of people here at Davis Polk, and also to just work generally with very strong people, whether I'm at an accounting firm, at a client, or the other side. The difficult of the pace is really how to slow down enough to train people. And I think training is best done when the senior lawyer and the junior lawyer are kind of figuring something out together. And I think back in the day, that's sort of how it felt all the time. But at the same time, I think a lot of structures you see in private equity, people have sort of figured them out. And how to do it is pretty well established. And the hard part is to slow down and make sure that the junior lawyers on the team in a very fast-paced transaction understand kind of all the nuances of the structure that you're not even pausing on, you're sort of going by, but that people need to understand, because if the facts change a bit, how you think about them will change a bit.
What advice do you have for the next generation?
Yeah, that's a really broad-based question, and I could probably go on and on for a long time. In general, I love hearing that type of question on other podcasts and other recordings, because I love hearing other people's answers as well. I think each professional story is frequently unique and has a lot of, interesting twists and turns and aspects, and there's something to learn, I think, from every story. In my case, as I mentioned at the outset, when I was describing the beginning of my career, my start in investment banking really began because I received an unexpected call and an invitation to, apply for an opportunity that, frankly, I didn't even understand that well at the time. And over the years, I've come to appreciate the fact that in a lot of the way careers develop, frequently it is the case that there is a pivotal moment that really, when you look back, was very hard to anticipate. So there's a degree of fortune and luck and serendipity, I think, in all of that. And so, what I love to tell young professionals that are looking forward to their career, certainly I think one ought to have a plan and one ought to have an idea of, what are things that interest them and that inspire them and make them want to work hard and motivate them. I think those are all very positive things and strategies that I would advise any young professional to adopt. But at the same time, I tell young people to be ready for something that might come out of left field because you never quite know what types of opportunities will come up there. So stay nimble and continue to develop your skill set because there may come a unique opportunity one day that maybe is not exactly what you had in mind, but that you do have the skills for. And if you find yourself in the right place at the right time with the right backing, you can pursue.
Well, yeah, I mean, keeping it light, right? I mean, truthfully, I'd love to go back and see what my wife was like as a young teenager. Because I met her, we were both in our 30s when I met her. And so we didn't really, it's not like we met in college and grew up together. So I'd love, I'd love to just sort of be around and watch that just because she's wonderful and super smart. And I'd love to see how she interacted with other people at that age. Is it, if I were going back and could talk to my younger self, as wonderful as my career has been, and I went directly from Northwestern to the University of Chicago Law School, and it's worked out fabulously. I would say take some time off between college and law school, and that's what I'm telling all of my kids. And when I say take time off, I mean just don't go directly to law school because as great as it is, it's just such a special time, and you can learn so much. One of my kids just finished college and he moved out to San Francisco and he's an investigative journalist. And I just think that sounds super interesting. He may do that the rest of his life. Maybe he'll end up doing something different, but just take time because it's a very long career, and taking 3, 4, 5 years and trying other things. That's the only thing I would say to my younger self, as great as this career has been so far.
Well, that's a good question. I think the simple answer is they're probably going to have to pay more to get people that would want to work at the IRS. And so, I mean, they need more people. They need people that can speak tax a little bit better. But the salaries that they're paying are pretty low. When Chairman Reddick got in front of Congress and they asked him about hiring, he said, look, I was in Arby's not too long ago and realized that the amount of money that they're paying their starting employees at Arby's was more than we're paying our starting employees at the IRS. So, I think the IRS probably have to pay more than they pay at a fast food restaurant in order to attract the best talent. But their training program has sort of taken a hit. They need more money to allocate to hiring, but they also need more money to allocate to training, and they need people in order to do the training. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 50 or 70% of the IRS is at the age that they're ready to retire, and so not only do we have a gap in the number of people that are already working at the IRS, it's just going to get worse over time. And those are the people that are the most experienced and that can do the best training. They're sort of on the threshold of leaving. So, I mean, I think even though the IRS got all this extra money, we're poised to be in a situation in which the IRS could actually do worse than it's doing right now, not better.
I think I was really fortunate enough to get a lot of really good advice along the way. And so starting with the following, and somebody did tell me this when I was very junior, and I took it to heart. First impressions matter, right? It's if you make a good first impression, you get a lot of leeway. If you make a bad first impression, it's very hard to get somebody to allow you to change that impression.
I'll give two general pieces of advice. The first, it really dovetails into what I just talked about teaming and collaboration. And that is for those younger, earlier, career professionals, team with your colleagues and team with your peers and develop those relationships. I'll say particularly in the accounting firm setting, I haven't worked, I'll say as like an adult. I did some law clerking in the legal, in the law firms, but haven't worked since my LLM in a law firm setting. But in the accounting firm setting, it is critical to develop those relationships with your peers, because the tax profession, and really, I think any professional services group, it can be a challenging career. It can be incredibly rewarding as well. But to overcome those challenges, you really, at least from my perspective, you need to have those relationships. You need to have those folks that you can work together with and collaborate with to basically overcome a bunch of those challenges. And that they might be tax technical. It could be you're having problem with time management. Maybe you're going to go on vacation, PTO, but you're on a big deal and you need someone to help cover you. None of those things are really, they're not going to be available to you unless you develop those relationships and you have that team, right, of peers and hopefully friends. Later on, we might talk about some other tax individuals that I'm good friends with. It all came from, work, right? So overall, you want to make work not feel like work and not feel like a job. You want to make it feel like part of your life, and hopefully that happens if you build those relationships. The second piece of advice, different direction, but can be related. It's be a rhinoceros. And you might say, well, what does that mean? So I'll explain briefly. At the suggestion of a very good friend of mine, many years ago, I read a book called, I think the full name is, I call it Rhino Success, but the full name is Rhinoceros Success by Scott Alexander. And it always stuck with me. And from a very high level, the premise is if you want to go out and be successful at any identified opportunity, be a rhinoceros, which is have thick skin, because we all know you're not going to succeed on the first try, maybe not the second, maybe not the 10th, right? But have that thick skin to keep going, and don't take things too personally, if possible, right, as you progress in your career. And the second is be hard charging. So with that tough skin, you can keep pushing, right? You can keep moving forward. Even if you run into certain, hurdles or certain blockages, you can, break through those with that kind of hard charging attitude.
So I'll give 4 pieces, or sort of 4 fundamental things. And this is what I tell young tax people here. The first is to frankly read and understand the actual law, the code and the regs on the stuff you're working on, and read a secondary source, go back and read the primary source again, and do that as you're doing things, even if no one's asking you. I think that's the way you really become a great tax lawyer. You need to actually look at the underlying law. And I think, again, it goes to the speed of things. Often people are moving too fast to actually do that. Secondly, I like to say, to people, responsibility is taken, not given. And so people who kind of do even more than they're asked to do tend to end up getting more responsibility than those who just ask for it. And so I guess I would sort of say it too. Third, people can't be afraid. And if they are afraid, they need to pretend they're not. That applies to all sorts of things, including asking questions or mostly asking questions, and just sort of getting input from other people. And then finally, and this is a peculiar one, which is to make everyone you work with look good. That's other members of your team, it's your client, it's the other side. Just, I think that's sort of a lesson in life, but it's certainly a lesson for somebody looking for a very long career in tax.
Many view tax professionals to have boring personalities. I feel like you might have something to share that might help dispel that notion.
Well, I'm happy to share about my own personal interests outside of work. I do have to dispel the notion, though. I have heard that one before, and I do have to defend folks that work in various areas of tax. I do think that when you get a chance to know these professionals, yes, they're experts in their field. They're very good at what they do. They spend a lot of time becoming experts in their field. But I've had a chance to get to know a lot of folks over the years, and pretty much regardless of the individual, once you have a chance to get to know someone, they all have really interesting hobbies and stuff that they can talk to you outside of tax world. So I have to kind of defend the general field a little bit there. But in terms of myself personally, what are the kinds of things that I'm into? I actually think my interests are fairly conventional. I'm a big sports fan. I love to watch football. I like to play golf. There's a number of ways in which, if I had more time, there's probably a limitless things that I would like to do. I like to do outdoor activities, hiking and just spending time outdoors with my family as well. I've got 2 kids and my wife, and any chance that we get to spend time together as a family is obviously a very cherished time. And then, as someone that's lived in New York City for the last 17 years, I've been fortunate enough to dabble in various things that the city has to offer. So I think one of the great things about New York City is the food scene and restaurants. So we love to try out different places, different cuisines from the entire gamut. And New York City is a pretty special place for that. So we're lucky to have that in our backyard.
Okay. Well, shots fired. At the tax folks out there. Tax people are people too. That's not my quote either. I'm borrowing that from a friend and colleague of mine. Outside of work, I think the tax folks are just as fun and as exciting as anyone else. I think we lead can lead, of course, pretty interesting and fun lives. Most recently, for example, a couple of friends of mine, they are tax professionals. One, I alluded to him earlier, works within the PTG team. We ended up going to kind of a long weekend trip, ended up at the Phoenix Open, or the Waste Management Open in Phoenix. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's the golf outing in Phoenix. It's quite a fun event. We ended up with in the 16th hole.
Well, I don't know if this tells anything about my personality, but yeah, I do kind of fancy myself as maybe a little bit more on the risk side than the risk adverse side, holistically. It brings me back to the days of being at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and, being younger in my idea of how to think about, myself and my personality. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to try out for something in college. I want to, in addition to academic study, I want to do something else. I decided to try out for the college cheerleading team as a male cheerleader. I did not make it. I got cut. It was rough, but I figured, hey, I could work out, I could lift things. I was relatively in shape back then, and not an athletic bone in my body. Really no experience with anything gymnastics or physical, anything of that nature. No balance, no coordination. But I think what we're seeing with respect to accounting personalities today are people that are genuinely interested in the profession, that are interested in learning, they're willing to take risks with themselves and kind of understanding how they can grow and have that ability to kind of step out and learn a lot about our clients, learn about the fundamentals of how clients' businesses work. You really get that excuse with accounting and tax. And I just picked the tax route because everyone likes the tax guy that can come in and think about planning and how we can structure things and how we can think about things in the future. But holistically, as a profession, tax accountants, tax professionals in general, like most accountants, are more than just number crunchers. We're adapting technology and solutions really to standardize the process for tax accounting and accounting in general, and navigating the complexities that exist serving our clients and serving the industry. And I think in 2023, I say that like it's a long time ago. That was last year, 2023. Deloitte released a tax transformation trend survey, really showing the need for tax accountants, tax departments, the need for data enhancement, understanding the aspects of the service need, using technology and automation, and really movement towards artificial intelligence, quite honestly, of the profession. And I think a lot of that thought process is not necessarily for the faint of heart, but it's more really driven on innovation.
So knowing you were going to ask me that question, I actually asked my kids how to respond, and they gave me nine items. So I'm just going to go through things. First, when I was a child, I lived down the street from Fred Rogers, who was the actor that played Mr. Rogers. So I'm one of very few people that can actually claim to have grown up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Second, I'm a lifelong member of Steelers Nation, and I actually go to Pittsburgh for a Steelers game sort of once or twice a year. At the same time, I am told by some that I can be a somewhat unpleasant person to actually watch Steelers games with, so I will sort of caveat it in that way. Third, I once escorted Walter Mondale to the men's room. Fourth, I continue to love driving. It's a great passion, and when I'm behind the wheel, I still feel the same exhilaration as I did when I was 16. I still remember the day I got my license. 5th, I prefer rye over bourbon. 6, I drink 7 shots of espresso every morning. 7, I ski like I golf. Neither something you want to see. 8, I don't exist on social media. And 9, in the summer of 1984, I drove around the country in a 1974 Volkswagen Bug that was green.
Keep riding with us as we blaze the TRA trail by subscribing in your preferred podcast app. Learn more and get in touch at plxcap.com. That's plxcap.com. Information presented is for informational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Parallaxes Capital Management LLC's podcast and its associated links offer news, commentary, and generalized research, not personalized investment advice. Nothing on this podcast should be interpreted to state or imply that past performance is an indication of future performance. All investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to consult with a tax professional before implementing any investment strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Parallaxes Capital Management LLC are registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training. Past performance is not indicative of future results.